Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening. It is right at 5:30, so we're going to go ahead and get things started for you. My name is Dakota Bogner, and I have the pleasure of working for the CSU Alumni Association, bringing events both virtual and in person to all of our wonderful alums, just like you. Tonight, we are hosting Networking Skills for Introverts. We'd love to have you put in the comment section where you're watching from, and if you're an alum, what year you graduated. Wherever you're tuning in from, we are so glad that you are here. I want to take a quick second to thank all of the Alumni Association members here in the virtual room with us. If it weren't for your dedication to your alma mater and for your membership, we couldn't do events like this. So thank you so much for all that you do. Shortly, I'll be putting some resources in the comment section for you, including links to learn more about membership, see our upcoming event schedule, and access many past event recordings that are available on our YouTube channel. If you have any questions during the workshop, please go ahead and submit those in the comments section. We'll be saving time at the end to answer those for you. The recording, slide deck, and materials from today's workshop will be sent to you within the week. And later on in the event, I'll be putting a survey link in the chat. If you do have a moment to fill that out, we would greatly appreciate your feedback. And now I'm going to turn things over to our presenter for the evening, Angela.
Hello. It's a real pleasure to be here with you tonight. I wanted to let you know that when Dakota and I first talked about topics, one of the things I was telling her is that many of my alum that come in, or mostly that I see virtually, they tell me that they feel like the networking skills that they learned, they kind of had lost, or they didn't feel as good about interacting with people, or didn't feel they were as good at interacting with people as they were pre-pandemic, just because there's been less interaction in general. And so we thought this would be a good topic to help maybe get you over that hump a little bit of getting back into more networking. So with that, I do want to acknowledge that networking does look different right now than it has in the past. At least for a while, you'll be less likely to have access to really large in-person networking events. But we'll talk plenty about other ways to network and also address techniques for networking in face-to-face situations, because those have been coming back slowly. There's just not as many of those as what there has been in the past. Hopefully we'll get back there, hopefully soon. I began researching networking skills in the early 90s due to what I thought at the time was a really unfortunate situation that I found myself in. In my first professional job after my master's degree, I had an extremely, and at the time I would say excessively extroverted supervisor who was sending me to networking events what seemed like every 10 to 15 minutes. I'm sure it wasn't every 10 to 15 minutes, but that's what it seemed like. I absolutely dreaded it. I'm an introvert. I didn't want to do it. I tried to get across to her that I was so bad at it that it was better just not to send anybody, better for the organization to just not send anybody than to send me, that it would be better for the reputation of the organization. She didn't stop. At the time, I felt like she was constantly tossing me to the wolves because it would be these huge networking events in big ballrooms. So I thought she was doing me a disservice instead of that she was doing me a really huge favor, because she also signed me up to do at least one major presentation every week or two for the 10 years that I worked with her or for her. I owe her a lot. I feel sure that I wouldn't be talking to you all today if I didn't have her as one really important networking contact who kept pushing and believed that I could move forward with both networking and presentations. So in the midst of all this misery, I started researching how to network. And remember, this was in the 90s. And the research on networking wasn't great. I knew it could be done because I saw other people talking at these events. So it was at least theoretically possible. But back then it was about it was like working the room, meeting as many people as possible, getting as many business cards as possible, being ready to dazzle others with your sales pitch and leave the room with them thinking that you were just fantastic. In other words, schmoozing them, being slick and sort of sales-like. And that isn't what networking is about. Unfortunately, we still carry around the stereotypes, and that has caused a lot of problems, especially for introverts, because when we think of those stereotypes, we think, yeah, that's the last thing I want to do. That's not me at all. I mean, I don't want to do that. Well, you don't need to do that. It's completely different. So let's talk about what does work. So some of the myths, because of these stereotypes, it's often thought that extroverts are just inherently better at networking. They aren't better, they just do it differently. Extroverts like milling around large groups of people, talking to as many people as possible. They draw energy from talking to lots of people and being in large groups. Introverts are generally equally good with people, but they prefer one-to-one or small group settings. They need downtime in between to recharge. They draw their energy from alone time, and they tend to get tired easily in large groups, especially large groups of strangers. Introverts tend to think deeply about issues and then formulate their full ideas after the interaction has already taken place. Extroverts tend to talk through things while they're thinking them through during the interaction, and they tend to give their views on the topic in the moment. They like a lot of back and forth when they're talking to someone, whereas the introvert is more likely to listen very attentively and actively before speaking. Introverts are uniquely gifted at listening very intently, very actively, which is great news because people really enjoy having someone listen to them with undivided attention. And those types of interactions are so rare in our current society. It's so rare that someone just gives their undivided attention to another person while they're talking without looking at their phone, without looking around to see if there's someone more interesting to talk to, with just giving their full attention. There's so many things, there's so many distractions in our current society that it's so rare that it makes you stand out. If you're listening attentively and you're paying close attention to what someone's saying, and then what you say back shows that you were listening intently. And it could be what you say back at the time, or it could be when you get in touch with them later on, which we'll talk about in a minute. But again, this uninterrupted deep listening is so rare that people will pay a therapist or a professional coach just to have someone listen intently to them. And that's where you come in. An introvert's greatest strength in a networking situation is that ability to listen intently. You know, the other part of it, honestly, when I was in those situations, it wasn't just that I'm good at listening attentively. It's also that I didn't want them to walk off because then I have to find someone else to talk to, right? So the skill that I already had, it really got honed in all of those networking situations, because when you're really listening, people like that and they stay. So it's another thing to think about when you're in a situation and maybe don't feel as comfortable as you'd like to. Just really tune in, really be curious about what that other person's saying. So the other myth that we talked about, that it's used to manipulate people or just shamelessly self-promote. If someone is being manipulative or self-promoting while networking, they're doing it wrong. The best definition of networking is building mutually beneficial connections, one person at a time. Another myth is that introverts are too quiet and shy to be good at networking. Introversion has nothing to do with being quiet and shy. It can. I mean, there are times when you just might feel quiet and shy. Sometimes an extrovert feels quiet and shy. But introversion is more a matter of how you gain energy and what it takes to recharge your batteries. For example, introverts can engage in small talk, but it tends to be exhausting. We tend to prefer deeper connections. We can still do it, but they just don't enjoy it the way an extrovert likely would. But once they form a bond with someone, introverts can be as chatty or chattier than your typical extrovert. But if you're in a potential networking situation and you're feeling quiet and shy, then there's one thing that you can always count on to counteract those feelings and get the other person talking. Ask them about things that they are passionate about and tell them about things that you're passionate about. It makes it much easier to let go of any feelings of being shy, and it helps you escape from small talk because you're already going straight for things that you're passionate about, they're passionate about. And the last myth that you have to talk to as many people as possible. Get a big stack of business cards to call the event a success. You're going for quality, not quantity. There's no way to make any kind of meaningful connection if you're trying to talk to every person in the room. Find a handful of people to make meaningful connections with, and think about what you can do as that person's talking. Think about what you could do to help that person. And then make notes, which is a good idea anyway. Step aside after you're done talking with each person or each few people. Step aside and make notes on the back of the business card about what you talked about, what you agreed to do to follow up. And then a day or two later, follow up. And when you do that, because what happens at a lot of networking events is someone will say, yeah, I'll give you a call, or we'll do lunch, or we'll this, or we'll that, and it never happens. Be the person that does follow up, the person that does what you say you'll do. Create a reputation for yourself. It absolutely sets you apart. Okay. Again, I want to talk a little bit about if you do get nervous in a networking situation. Again, not all introverts do, but let's say you're feeling particularly tired that day, or you've had to deal with lots of people in a day, which can just make it feel like you don't really want to walk into a ballroom full of people or deal with a whole lot more because you need that recharge time. So one of the things that can really help is to get rid of the fight, flight, or freeze reaction that we get when we're nervous. Now, before I talk about that, though, I want to mention that there's a very real difference between introversion and social anxiety. So introversion is just, you need alone time to recharge. Social anxiety is a clinical fear of being in social situations. It doesn't go away when you have time to recharge. So I want to make that distinction. So again, it's about energy and recharging your energy. But let's do a quick review of the fight or flight or freeze phenomenon. So way back in caveman days, if a caveman walks around a boulder and there's a saber-toothed tiger standing there, the caveman has a few choices. He can fight well enough to kill or hurt the saber-toothed tiger so that he can get away, or he can just flee. He can run fast enough to get away, or he could freeze and just not know what to do. Now, we're probably not descended from the freeze people. They probably got eaten. So we're descended from the fight or flight for the most part. What happens during fight or flight is that there's chemicals that go off in the brain, adrenaline, cortisol, The blood flows away from the extremities to the internal organs so that you have that energy to fight or flee. Important to note, the blood flows away from the brain because it's time for instinct, for quick action, not really the time to, okay, let's break out in dyads and let's problem solve what might be the best. It's just quick action. Jumping out, a car is coming down the road, you jump out of the way. The difficulty that we have in today's society, I mean, it's a good thing, but it's also a difficulty in terms of expending that energy, is that most things aren't life and death kinds of situations, but our body is still wired. That primitive part of our brain and our body is still wired to react as if they are life and death situations. So we get that happening. The cortisol, the adrenaline, your hands feel cold and clammy because the blood flows away from the extremities. You're not thinking as clearly. It's a little bit foggy because the blood is flowing away from the brain. And the other thing that happens during fight or flight that can be a problem with networking or a whole variety of other things is that during fight or flight, we have kind of tunnel vision and we see what's wrong or out of place or dangers, what the dangers are. The reason for that is, again, that's why we're all still on the planet, is because our ancestors were able to pick out things that were wrong and avoid them. Run from them, fight them, whatever it is that they needed to do. But in a networking situation, let's say, I mean, at least hopefully there'd be absolutely no reason why you'd need to fight or flee. You might feel like fleeing in some cases, but we still have all that energy in the body to get rid of. So let's talk about how to get rid of it if that does happen. So let's say just a lot of things happen on a given day and you're already feeling kind of on edge, and then you get to the networking event and someone that you really like that you met at the last networking event, you see them across the room, you smile, wave to them, you start to move toward them across the room, they frown, turn their back to you, and whisper to the person next to them. Now, chances are excellent that they didn't see you and that they're whispering about who knows what, but not about you. But depending on the kind of day you had, it can set off a little bit of that fight or flight kind of reaction. So some things that you can do that cut the fight or flight reaction right away is abdominal breathing. That's the first thing that I would try. So if you put one hand on your chest and one hand on your abdomen, and you breathe in, it should be the hand on your abdomen that moves. The hand on your chest shouldn't move at all. That's diaphragmatic abdominal breathing. It cuts the fight or flight response, because even when you start to get nervous, you start to take these tiny breaths that go like this far down into the lungs. Just that by itself can send the body into fight or flight, because if you're breathing like that, your brain thinks, oh my gosh, something awful must be happening. Yeah, and then all of the fight or flight stuff starts happening in the body. Given that, it's helpful to note that it takes 8 full seconds before something happens. So let's say this person turns their back, whispers to the person next to them, and you start to feel anxious and feel a little bit of that fight or flight. It takes 8 full seconds before the adrenaline, the cortisol, goes off in your brain, before the blood starts to flow from your extremities. So if you think about it, that's a long time. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. So it gives you time to regroup and get a grip, do some deep abdominal breaths, maybe find someone else that you know, that you feel really comfortable with to talk to for a bit while you calm down. Do whatever you need to do to get yourself back to baseline. If all else fails and that nervous energy is still there, make it work for you. There's tons of research that shows that we feel exactly the same symptoms when we're excited as we do when we're anxious. Tons of research on it. So what the research says is that it all depends on the context and how you decide to label it. So if it's something you really want, let's say someone you really want to go talk to, someone you think could really make a difference for your career or your life or whatever it is, label those feelings excitement and go for it, because it's up to you to decide the context. It's up to you to decide whether those symptoms are excitement or anxiety. Why not decide it's excitement? Here's something else that can help you along. It's something that works really well for me. In the movie We Bought a Zoo, there's one line in that movie that has always stuck with me. Matt Damon's character is telling his son, all you need is 20 seconds of insane courage, 20 seconds of embarrassing bravery, and I promise you, something great will come of it. Now, in his case, in the movie, he was thinking specifically of the time that he got up the courage to talk to the woman who later became his wife, and then ultimately led to his terrific life with her and their 2 beautiful children. In a networking situation, those 20 seconds of bravery can mean the difference between doing nothing and getting nothing out of it as a result, or having the courage to make a connection that might lead to anything. A really important networking contact, a great lifetime friendship, a shot at your dream job. You don't know. You don't know what might happen as a result of making that connection. But you do know what will happen if you don't try. Nothing. So the first step is often a matter of pushing through some of those mild to moderate fight or flight responses, even though it feels unnatural. As I said, we're all hardwired with it. It feels natural to avoid things that set off that response. It feels like the right thing to do at the time. So let's say we see someone that we want to go talk to, but we're feeling nervous about it. Someone who could really make a difference in our career, let's say. Our heart speeds up. We might begin to feel a little sweaty. Our hands get cold and clammy. Our breathing speeds up. We might feel a little nauseated. We decide, I better not go talk to this person because I'm feeling pretty negative about it. And I'm actually not feeling good in general. So when you don't go, when you don't do it, whatever that thing is, our body returns to normal. And we think, whew, that was a close one. No, it wasn't. Go talk to that person. Go do what you need to do. Push through it. Even though it feels normal to want to just not do it, push through to the other side. You don't know what might happen as a result. So, if and when you feel those symptoms, commit to those 20 seconds of courage, label it excitement, and go for it. And if it doesn't go exactly as you'd hoped, think about this. There is no failure. There is only feedback. Learn from the feedback, regroup in whatever way you need to, and try again. Another thing to work on to cut down on that fight or flight response is to silence your inner critic. This is part of fight or flight, but it's separate enough that I wanted to talk to you about it specifically. We all have negative self-talk that goes on in our heads. It's often helpful to know that this voice is part of the subconscious mind. It's been taking in messages from the time you were able to process. And the subconscious is like a computer. It responds based on what's been programmed into it. The average person has heard the word no or been told what they are not capable of doing 148,000 times by the time they reach 18. And it's not like when we reach 18 and move out that all goes away. I mean, we take that with us. So one of the jobs of the subconscious, this is very important. One of the jobs of the subconscious is to take the programming that's what's been programmed in and make external reality conform to the internal reality that's been painted. So it's working day and night to try to make sure that you are the person that your programming says that you are. Keep in mind, even though it's been programmed in, those negative thoughts are almost never true. Almost never. They usually started, usually started long, long ago and have nothing to do with reality, the person that you are now. It can be really helpful also to name the self-talk that you hear and figure out when the negative voices in your head that's telling you you can't do something, or you shouldn't take a risk, or that everyone else is better at this than you are, or whatever. The voice goes by a variety of names. In the research, it's often called the gremlin, the inner critic, the saboteur. One of my friends calls hers the "you can't do it" committee. Naming the critic helps you separate yourself from it and makes it easier to fight back or just disregard what it's saying. One of my past clients had a particularly active inner critic, so he named it the voice of judgment and pretended it was a radio station playing in his head. He used the initials KVOJ, all judgment, all the time, 24 hours, commercial free. That's what helped him separate himself from the negative talk. By the way, again, I want to make sure that you hear this part. The subconscious doesn't know what's real and what isn't. It only knows what's been programmed into it. So if you've been told something enough times, or you've told yourself something enough times, the subconscious thinks it's true, and it goes about trying to make external reality conform to that internal picture that's been painted. So it can be things like, you'll never be as successful as your brother, you'll never amount to anything, you're terrible with people, you're not leadership material, and on and on. Remember, quite likely, whatever it is, it's not true. It's just nonsense that's been systematically programmed in. So advocate for yourself and point out when you hear something that sounds suspiciously like the voice of the inner critic. So things like, that's just the way I am, I've always been bad with whatever it is, that's your inner critic. On your worksheet, I've got more about the inner critic and how you can work to reprogram any negative or self-defeating programming you might be dealing with. The inner critic takes up so much time and energy. It's time to set it and you free. Now, let's move back to networking itself. Being interested is way more important in cultivating a relationship and maintaining a relationship than being interesting. That's another one of the myths out there, that you need to be gregarious and the life of the party and have all these interesting stories and all these kinds of things. No. Being interested in other people, that's what gets the dialogue going and keeps it going. And we've already talked about the introvert's unique ability to listen deeply and make real connections. It's also important to note that people judge those who listen intently to them as being intelligent, interesting people who probably have a lot of interesting and intelligent things to say themselves and who are worth being listened to. When you listen intently to someone and they get to talk about themselves, it lights up certain parts of their brain and sets off certain feel-good chemicals in their brain that they then associate with you. So be interested in that other person. Be determined to find something interesting about the person you're talking to. Something you may have heard in the conversation, maybe a fascinating fact or idea you can follow up on with interesting questions of your own. Several studies suggest that curious people have better relationships, they connect better, they enjoy socializing more. People are more easily attracted to and feel socially closer to individuals who display curiosity. Also, it's hard to be nervous and feel intensely curious at the same time. Next, ask genuine questions. So if you're asking interesting, thoughtful questions, it's because you're deeply tuned in to what the other person is talking about. And if you're an introvert, follow up with your thoughts when you reconnect after the event, because very often an introvert will think deeply about something and then they might have something to say about it later, not necessarily during the interaction. And they'll often beat themselves up about that. They'll say, oh man, why didn't I say that perfect thing or this perfect thing at that time when I was talking to the person? I blew it. No, you didn't. Think about how good it makes you feel when someone follows up with you after an event, let's say through an email, and says something like, I've been thinking a lot about what you said about X, and it's really intriguing. I did some research and I think that Y might be one possible solution. Would you like to get together for coffee sometime in the next 2 weeks and discuss it further? So they're thinking, wow, that person is really tuned in. So if you do that, they're thinking, you're tuned in. They were really listening to me. How often does that happen at one of those events? It happens when you're there. That's when. Synchronizing with them is another thing you can do to move things along more quickly in terms of them feeling comfortable with you. So it could be their gestures, their posture, their breathing, the types of words they use to describe things. Like visual people might say, I see what you're saying, or auditory people might say, I hear you. So you might use the same body posture, similar gestures, similar language, matching their breathing patterns. It makes that other person feel immediately connected and comfortable with you. They don't know why necessarily. They don't notice that you're mirroring them or synchronizing with them. Now, if they do something really wild, stick their finger in their ear and hop on one foot, don't do that. But subtler things, if you just synchronize with that, they'll just feel comfortable with you and they'll open up to you more and they'll remember you very favorably. They'll want to talk to you again. So by taking the initiative and making the conversation about the other person, really tuning into them, asking good questions and shining a spotlight on someone else first, it makes you the most interesting person in the room. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about general tips for a networking event. Now we're talking about in-person events. I've got a lot of information on this on your handout, so we're just going to highlight a few things, a few important things to remember. First of all, before a networking event, plan ahead. Get plenty of rest so that you're ready for it. So you've already, because introverts need that rest time. So preload with that rest time before you get into the event, if at all possible. And rest time in this case just means alone time. I don't mean you have to take a nap or anything, just alone time to recharge, be ready for it. Check on people's LinkedIn profiles who are going to be there. Begin thinking about a few people you'd like to meet, that you'd like to talk to, what you'd like to talk to them about. Think about open-ended questions you can ask, things that won't just give a yes or no answer. So questions that begin with who, what, why, where, when, and how tend to open people up and get them talking. Get there early and join smaller groups. Then you'll have familiar faces in the crowd throughout the rest of the evening. It's also much less intimidating to talk to a few people and begin forming a small group than it is to come in a bit later and try to break into bigger groups. Find someone who looks miserable and go talk to them. They're sitting alone, they look miserable, they will be very grateful. Another really helpful thing is to volunteer for events when you can, so that you have a built-in reason to talk to people and a built-in something to do when you feel uncomfortable. It also gives you that extra assurance that you will go if you've already committed to volunteering. I'm sure you've all had the experience that I've had of going back up to your room quickly after a conference day has ended to drop off your things before the networking event starts, let's say 30 minutes later in the main ballroom. Then once you're in your room, it's easy to decide that maybe you should watch a little bit of news so that you're up on current events in case anyone wants to talk about that. Then you might decide to look through your notes from the day, because that way you'll be more informed and you have more to talk about. And then you might decide that you're probably covered in conference grime, whatever that means, and you need to take a quick shower to freshen up before you go. And then after all of this, it's 10 minutes past the time the event started, and you decide that it would be rude to show up late, even though there are hundreds and hundreds of people showing up at a variety of times, and no one will notice or care exactly when you walk in. But again, if you've already volunteered to help with this event, you'll go. Another easy thing to do, so let's say you finish talking to someone and then you're just standing there and you're looking around, you don't see anyone else that looks like they want to talk, or everybody's involved in other conversations. Get in a line, any line. That gives you a person in front of you and a person behind you and a common thing to talk about. So it could be the line to the food, and you can ask the person in front or behind you if they know what this dish is or if they've tried that dish. If it's a line for a restroom and you're a woman, you've got the ever popular topic of, can you believe that? There's nobody in line at the men's restroom. Why don't architects think about this when they figure out how many stalls they're going to put in the women's restroom? That one's always a good conversation starter. It could be that you get in a line to pretend you need to get something out of your coat. Just anything so that you've got someone in front of you, behind you, you've got something to do, you're in a group, you don't feel just like you're standing there and exposed and you're not sure what to do. Practice graceful verbal entries and exits. Things like, what brought you to the event? What are you hoping to get out of it? How long have you been part of this group or worked for this company or lived in this area? Ask the questions and then be totally present for the answer. Focusing on the other person helps you be less nervous and, again, shows your listening skills and your interest. And then make graceful verbal exits. Primacy and recency research says that they'll remember the first impression of you and the last impression of you the most. So you'll want to avoid something like, okay, bye, and dart off. You want to say something to signify a closure of the conversation. Again, I have examples on your worksheet. So a few of them: have a wonderful time with your XYZ weekend plans. It was lovely chatting with you. I'll be sure to, and then whatever it is you're going to do to follow up. Good luck with your blank project coming up on the date. Shows you were really interested, really in tune. I had such a good time talking to you. I will shoot you an email tomorrow. I'm so glad we met. Thanks for sharing that blank story. It was great. Then, don't overanalyze what you've said. Chances are excellent that they didn't notice whatever it is you think that you said or did wrong. And then follow up the next day. Play to your strengths. Email useful articles if you're someone who likes to research. Connect them to people who you think can help them. Set up lunch or coffee. Continue to nurture these connections that you've begun to build. You never know when you might be able to help each other in the future. Now, using informational interviews can be a really wonderful way to make a strong networking connection. And it tends to be where introverts really shine because, again, in an informational interview, you're asking them questions. You have a list of questions that's about them, and you're paying very close attention to the answers. And you barely talk during an informational interview other than to ask the questions. But later they'll tell someone, Angela and I had this great conversation, even though I barely said anything, because people love to talk about themselves. And so securing an informational interview, a lot of my alum will say, oh, I don't want to bother people, you know, that takes up their time and all. No, people love it. They love to talk about themselves. Even if initially they sound a little bit hesitant, once they get into it, they love it. And you have to be the timekeeper, because they want to, you'll say, oh, I promised that I would, and please use a watch, never your phone to check the time, ever. In any kind of networking situation, just your phone shouldn't be anywhere. So you might say, oh, I promised I'd only take 20 minutes of your time or 30 minutes of your time, and we're getting close to that. And they'll say, no, because I want to tell you about the time that, but you don't want to let it go more than 5-10 minutes at the most past the time that you promised, because you don't want to have anything negative associated with this interaction that you had with them. So you don't want them to say, well, I would have gotten that project done if Angela wouldn't have, taken up all my time, which totally isn't true. I mean, I only took up 5 to 10 more minutes more, but you don't want anything negative associated with it. Other things to keep in mind, why informational interviewing and networking in general is so powerful, is that 60 to 80% of people get their next job through networking. And informational interviewing is one of the most powerful networking tools you can use. Also, only about 20% of open jobs ever hit an open job posting anywhere, including their company website. That means that you need to figure out the kind of information you need, the type of industry you'd like to work in, the particular job environment that would be best for you, and then you can find people who can give you this information. And then you're in a better position to target the job that you want, one that's going to work for you. So to identify these networking contacts, you can ask colleagues, friends, family. You can join the CSU alum groups on LinkedIn if you haven't already. You can do a search on LinkedIn, look at those fields of interest, put in those keywords. Contact me if you want more information about how to do this. I can send you a video on exactly how to find the right people to contact for informational interviews. You can also find the people that you'd like to connect with, see what groups they're in, and join those groups, because if you're not all of them, a couple of those groups, because then you can contact them directly through the group. LinkedIn will tell you that you need to spend $29.99 a month so that you can contact anyone within LinkedIn. You can do that anyway by just joining groups of people that you want to connect with and then just contacting them through the group. So once you've decided who you want to contact, again, just go with your strengths. If you're comfortable calling, make a phone call. If you'd rather ease into it, start with an email or something like LinkedIn to make that initial contact. And etiquette is very important. I mentioned in the beginning, I need to mention it again. If you've told, it might be that you only need 15 minutes. Maybe you just have 1 or 2 questions. But if it's 15, 20, or 30 minutes, make a list of your questions and make sure that that's how much time you spend. No more than 5 to 10 minutes over that, and only if they initiate that extra time. And you'll often have to gently inform them of what an informational interview is, because they will often think that you're asking to be interviewed for a job, which would be great, but you're not. You're asking for information. You're interviewing them to get information that will help you with whatever this next transition is. If you are in transition, let's say you're moving to another city, you're looking for another job, those are perfect times for informational interviews, because it makes perfect sense why you would want to contact someone and ask these questions that will help you decide what direction you want to go next. Always, always, always send a thank you within 24 hours, an email thank you within 24 hours of that informational interview. If it seems appropriate, you can add your resume, because you never take a resume with you for an informational interview, or if you're doing it virtually, you never send it to them ahead of time. But you can say something like, given the research I've done and the great information I got from you, I've decided this is a direction I'd like to go. Please let me know if you hear of something. I've attached my resume. And then keep them a warm contact by maybe once a month, send them an email with a link to an article you think they might benefit from given your conversation. You might offer to do an e-introduction between them and someone else that you think would be a good contact for them. It could be just keeping them updated on your job search, whatever you need to do to keep them a warm contact, and do a variety of these informational interviews so that you're building a web, a really strong networking web that will help you move into whatever the next thing is, wherever you want to go next. Social media can be great for introverts to build personal and professional contacts, because while meeting professionals, let's say at a huge career fair, might seem overwhelming, contacting professionals and potential employers online can be much less stressful. And it gives you time to craft the perfect posts and the perfect responses. If you haven't already, it's usually best to start with 2 or possibly 3 social media platforms for professional networking. Go with the types of platforms that are best suited for your particular industry or career track. LinkedIn, with its 500 million members, is an essential personal network, and one that's not used optimally at all. Not nearly what it could be. Most people don't do very much other than kind of an outline of a profile, and then they start using it in a panic when they have to change jobs. It's better to learn to use it before you need it. Connect with folks you already know, people that you'd like to know, people that you should know. You should also post your own content about once a week, once every 2 weeks, to show your expertise and to keep you visible on the platform. Also, when you go to add people to your professional network, please don't use that template that says, I'd like to add you to my professional network on LinkedIn. Always put a personal note, the reason that you'd like to connect with them, or something to give it a personal touch. So even with social media, even though it's a really effective tool for diversifying and evolving your network, it can be a challenge to reach out to people you don't know. Too many people try to focus on connecting with CEOs, senior people within the executive suite of whatever organization they're interested in. They usually don't get a response unless they're maybe at that level, and even then, very often don't get a response. Instead, prioritize building relationships with people about your level and 1 to 2 rungs above your level, because this network will continue to build and grow with you as you grow in your profession. And then you can connect with them and they can connect with you for opportunities down the line. When you reach out, your entire message should be easy to read on a phone screen. So think about it as like, what 3 bullets do you want to get across? The people who get the best response rates treat the message as if it were a handwritten note with a personal touch. So your voice, your personality comes through. According to research, referencing a mutual connection gives you about a 51% chance of getting a response. 53% if you went to this, so if they went to CSU and you went to CSU at the same time. That gives you about a 53% response rate. Also, the research shows that if your message is about 100 words, then you're the most likely to get a response. Anything 500 words and over, you're very unlikely to get a response. So sometimes you don't need to do a whole informational interview or any kind of a meeting or anything. You just want advice. You just want to directly ask for advice. That's absolutely fine on social media. Just be direct, kind and professional and direct. So you could just say, I'm kicking around some ideas. I'd love to bounce something off you. Can I ask you a question? Or you can just put the question in. Or if you need a little bit more time, you could say, I'm struggling with this problem. I'd really like to get your take on it. Do you have 15 minutes to talk? Social media opens up incredible possibilities for strengthening your professional network. Make sure you approach online networking as an extension of how you would interact with people in the real world. Connect with people personally by finding common ground, then build trust and long-term relationships. Try to stay away from one-time transactional kinds of things. Build that trust, build those long-term relationships. That's what networking is. Okay, so it's time for you to go out and practice, not right this moment, but time for you to go out and practice your networking skills. So in the chat box, please let Dakota know, and then she's just going to move them over to my chat screen, what action steps you're going to take. And this is also the time for you to ask any questions that you might have. Feel free to contact me for additional information about any of the things we talked about tonight, or questions you have about any aspect of your job search or your career. I would be delighted to help. So, all right. Any questions, comments, things that you're going to do? Looks like we don't have any so far. Okay, I'm going to wait just about another minute just to see if anyone has a question. Or it could be, again, what action step you're going to take. Okay, so if someone was at an event and you didn't get a chance to talk to them, is it appropriate to reach out afterwards? Absolutely it is. That's another example of it feels good to be contacted, to like it would feel to you if someone said, gosh, I saw you at the event. I didn't get a chance to get over and talk to you, and I really wanted to ask you this question, or I really wanted to follow up on something that we talked about, the last time we met, whatever it is. Absolutely. Yes. And that's actually really good timing, because then it's not out of the blue either. Best time would be the day after the event, if you can't talk to them during the event itself. Also, if you want more information about how to find them, get in touch with me, because there's, if you don't, for example, have their email, there's something called hunter.io where you can find anyone's email, and it's free. And you can get something like, I think it's 100 emails per month or something like that, and it's free. Okay, any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And again, Contact me with any questions you have about your career or job search. I would be delighted to help you. Oh, we do have one more question. Any suggestions on how to reach out to people if it's been a long time since you chatted with them and want to reconnect? Assuming that the last time you talked to them, it was amicable. In other words, there's nothing that you need to apologize for, or because it happens. It can certainly happen that someone that you were in contact with before, and especially since we had the pandemic and still have the pandemic, there's all sorts of reasons why people fall out of touch. So absolutely, you can say something about, I've been thinking about contacting you for quite some time, or something that makes them feel good about the fact that you're reaching out to them now. Such and such happened, and you're the first person I thought of. So yes, definitely. Just start with a sort of a compliment, and then just move on to what if you'd like to get together for coffee, or if you have a specific question. The things that you don't want to do, if you haven't talked to someone for a really long time, would be things like, and a lot of people do this, and they don't really think about it as being something that's not that cool. But what you wouldn't want to do, if let's say it's been years since you talked to someone and you just applied for a job at their company, and you contact them and say, I just applied to such and such position. Can you recommend me to that supervisor or to your supervisor? I just applied for something in your unit. Could you recommend me? That's not cool. That's something you'll want to ease into. You want to get back into that relationship with them first. And then just let them know that you're also thinking about their company, and maybe just ask if they have suggestions or what the culture is like or something like that. Does that answer the question well enough? If not, please let me know. All right. Well, again, thank you very much for joining us tonight, and I hope to hear from you. Good night.